On the morning of October 21st, 1966, the people of Aberfan, a small mining village in the south of Wales, started their day like any other. The autumn rain had been falling for days, leaving the ground heavy and waterlogged. Children were heading to school, parents were off to work, but nobody knew what was about to happen. High above the village, a huge pile of waste from the nearby coal mine sat heavy and unstable. For years, people worried it wasn't safe. That morning, after so much rain, the ground beneath it finally gave way. A wall of black sludge rushed down the hillside, crashing into homes, streets, and Pantglas Junior School. In a matter of minutes, an entire generation of children were wiped out. This is the story of Aberfan, a disaster that could have been prevented, and a tragedy that has left scars that will never fully heal. Aberfan was a small, tightly knit community near Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales. It was the kind of village where everyone knew each other, where generations had worked in the coal mines that had powered the region's economy. Most households had someone employed at the Merthyr Vale colliery, the beating heart of the village and its main source of income. But with mining coal also came consequences. With every ton of coal brought up, there was waste of ash, dust, loose rock, and slurry. This waste, which was called spoil, had to be dumped somewhere, but rather than transport it far away, the solution was simple but also short-sighted. It was piled up on the hillsides above the village in the valley. 7 spoil tips were built over time, but number 7, constructed in the early 1960s, was the most problematic. Towering over 100 feet tall, it was filled with loose waste and placed directly over a natural underground spring. Parents, teachers and ministers raised concerns multiple times. Many knew the land was unstable, and children would often play on the tip and notice the ground squelching underfoot with the occasional movement of spoil. But these warnings were largely ignored by the National Coal Board, who were responsible for the site. Instead, the NCB threatened to close the Aberfan mine if residents continued to raise concerns about the unstable spoil tips. The Coal Board's response was to imply that any further fuss would lead to the mine's closure, effectively threatening the town's livelihood. Adding to the risk, there was no proper drainage system in place, as the water from the springs would seep up into the tip, saturating it from below. By October 1966, Aberfan had seen nearly 3 weeks of persistent rainfall. The hillsides were soaked, and tip number 7, holding an estimated 150,000 tonnes of waterlogged spoil. Residents could feel the tension in the air, but no one could have predicted just how quickly and violently things would unravel. Friday, October 21st, 1966, the last day of school before the half-term break. Children at Pantglas Junior School were excited for the weekend, but just after 9 AM, that excitement was shattered. At 9:13 AM, a strange rumble echoed across the valley. Above the mist on the hills, something was happening, unknown to the village below. Many described it as sounding like a low-flying jet, but this wasn't an aircraft. It was the beginning of a catastrophe. Tip number 7, saturated with rainwater, had begun to collapse. The layers of spoil could no longer hold back the weight. A massive section gave way, turning into a fast-moving landslide of black sludge, rock, and debris. The avalanche travelled downhill at speeds estimated of 20 miles an hour. It was almost half a mile wide. Trees were flattened instantly. Fences, walls, and roads were consumed in seconds. There was no warning, just a thunderous roar of the moving slurry, gaining momentum with every passing second. The first impact was at the rear of the Pantglas Junior School, where over 240 pupils had just settled into the morning school routine. Money was being collected for lunch by the dinner ladies. Students were in the class waiting to head to their morning assembly. Suddenly, pure darkness. The wave of coal waste smashed into the school with brute force. Walls buckled, ceilings collapsed, classrooms vanished under the weight. The slurry poured in through windows and doorways, rising to chest height within moments. In the chaos, teachers tried desperately to shield their pupils. Some formed human shields, others shouted instructions that no one could hear. Many children were thrown from their seats or buried where they sat. For the majority, there was no chance to escape. Deputy head teacher David Bainan was in the classroom when the disaster unfolded and when the slurry from the colliery spill hit the school. Moments before, in a blink of an eye, Bainan scooped up the 5 nearest children into his arms and braced himself against the blackboard to shield them from the oncoming wave, trying to protect his students until the final moments, putting himself in the way of the slurry. Sadly, Bainan and all 34 children in the classroom were killed instantly. The South Wales Argus reported that he had been found dead, still clutching the children in his arms. He had only been working at the school for 6 weeks. Outside, residents ran towards the noise, not fully understanding what had happened. They arrived to scenes of utter devastation. The school was unrecognisable. Thick, black sludge coated everything. Only rooftops remained visible in places where the buildings once stood. Within minutes, rescue efforts began. Locals, miners, and emergency responders dug with bare hands, spades, or anything they could find. Time was critical, but the sludge was heavy and unrelenting. It clung to everything and even made it hard to breathe. The delicate and specific nature of the catastrophe led many to follow the instructions of the local miners, as they had worked with this material day in, day out. People from local areas soon came to help, but became more of a hindrance rather than a sign of help and support. Some children were pulled out alive in the immediate aftermath of the event, their tiny bodies covered in mud, some still clutching books or toys. Later, one girl was found standing, uninjured, in a pocket of air. But those miracles were very few and far between. The last child to be rescued was Jeff Edwards, aged 8. He had just visited the local tuck shop before school for his usual sweets of pink shrimps, flying saucers, and sherbets. He was pulled out around 11 AM, nearly 2 hours after the initial impact. Nobody else was found alive after that time. In total, 144 people died. 116 of them were children, mostly aged between 7 and 10. The force of the slide and the weight of the waste made survival for those inside the school impossible. The pain of the day didn't end when the sludge settled. It lingered in the eyes of the rescue workers, in the voices of parents calling out names in hope that their child was still alive. The immediate days after the disaster were consumed with grief, chaos, and mourning. The village was in shock. Families had lost 1, 2, sometimes even 3 children in a single morning. Entire classrooms were gone. The funerals began just days later. On October 27th, a mass burial was held at the Brintaff Cemetery. Rows of small, white child-sized coffins were carried through the streets in silence. In one heartbreaking moment, 81 children and 1 teacher were laid to rest together, side by side. Over 2,000 people attended this specific ceremony. For many survivors and parents, the psychological toll was lifelong. Mothers reported phantom cries in the night. Children who survived often suffered guilt, nightmares, or PTSD. Many even refused to return to school ever again. A government inquiry quickly followed. It found that the National Coal Board was directly responsible. The placing of tip number 7 over underground springs was deemed negligent, and locals' prior warnings had been ignored. Yet, despite this damning conclusion, nobody was ever prosecuted. The chairman of the NCB, Lord Robins, was widely criticised, especially after missing the first day of the inquiry to accept a university appointment. His apology was seen as hollow. To add insult to injury, compensation for the victims' families was very low. While many had expected at least £5,000, only £500 was awarded for the loss of a child. Some parents were even asked to prove how close they were to their children before receiving it. Aberfan had been betrayed, not just by the disaster, but by those who failed to protect it afterwards. Today, Aberfan stands as a place of both sorrow and strength. The site where Pantglas Junior School once stood is now a peaceful memorial garden. Well-kept lawns and trees have replaced the rubble and sludge. Each flower bed is a quiet tribute to the children who never got to grow up. Nearby, a white arch marks the entrance, and a memorial wall bears the names of every single victim. The disaster sparked major reforms across Britain. New laws were introduced on how coal waste could be stored. Strict regulations on spoil tips were enforced nationwide, ensuring that no community would ever face this same risk again. Survivors and families have campaigned for decades to keep the memory alive. In the year 2000, the Aberfan Education Charity was established using part of the original disaster fund to provide opportunities for local youth, a lasting symbol of hope rising from tragedy. In 2019, the UK government finally agreed to repay £150,000 to the disaster fund, money that had controversially been taken out years earlier to help clear up tip number 7. The tragedy of Aberfan lives on in documentaries, books, and in quiet remembrance. For many in Wales, it's not just a historic event, it's a wound that still aches. But out of darkness came a fierce sense of community, resilience, and dignity. Aberfan's legacy isn't just what was lost, it's how the village refused to be forgotten. This is the story of Aberfan.